Hey guys, it's Emily. I'm a multidisciplinary artist and I refuse to niche down. That's why I'm bringing to you a super mini podcast episode. Round of applause for my bestie being willing to chat with me about her neighborhood.
I'm Allie. I'm 30 years old and I've lived in Santa Monica for a little over 5 years now.
How would you describe your neighborhood to someone who has never been here before?
I guess I would first and foremost describe my neighborhood as walkable, and that's one of my favorite things about it. I feel the most in my neighborhood when I'm like walking my dog or walking to the library. I also think it's really beautiful and it's really close to the beach.
What made you choose to live in this area?
That's funny. I'm not sure I actually chose to live in this area as much as I do like it. When I moved to Los Angeles, I was actually just extending a trip that I had taken out here, and I was visiting my cousin who lived here, and then I chose to move. I moved in with her kind of temporarily, and then the pandemic hit, and I stayed here through that, and I've actually outlasted her because now she's moved out.
What's your favorite way to spend a day off in the neighborhood?
I love going to Palisades Park. It's a park that overlooks the beach. It's like across the PCH from it, but it's beautiful, and taking a book there and maybe some lunch, a little picnic vibe, is a pretty perfect day off.
How has the neighborhood changed since you've lived here?
I'm not really sure that it's changed that much. I won't pretend to be the most tapped in, but like in terms of things that I saw and loved when I arrived and things that I see and love now, they look pretty similar.
How has this neighborhood changed you?
I moved here from New York 5 years ago, and I think one of the biggest things I was looking for when I moved was a change of pace. This is a dramatic change of pace, and I think living in my neighborhood and being here, particularly through the pandemic, when my neighborhood felt like the furthest I could travel and explore as like a new person to LA, I found a much more peaceful version of me has like emerged.
If you could change one thing about your neighborhood, what would it be?
Honestly, if I have a least favorite thing about my neighborhood, it is that it is lacking in diversity, kind of in a big way. And while I really enjoy being here, there are times when it feels really disconcerting to like walk around and never see anyone who looks like me.
Where would you take someone who has never visited here before?
Outside of like the obligatory walk around my neighborhood, which I think is not to be missed, one of my favorite things about being on this side of town is that I'm so close to the PCH, and right along the PCH we have the ocean, which is a great option, and Topanga Canyon is quite possibly one of my favorite places ever, but definitely in LA, and the Palisades Bluffs would have definitely been super high on that list, but unfortunately I think they got destroyed in the fire.
The Palisades fire started at the beginning of January, which was just a few miles away. It was really close to here. How did that impact you?
Yeah, especially in those first 2 days, it was very close and unclear which ways the winds were going to blow it. The fire started on Tuesday morning, and I could actually see it as I was driving back to my apartment. And then by that evening, we actually had to evacuate because we were so close to an evacuation line. It was very scary. I'm obviously very grateful that we didn't lose everything, but I guess I've honestly never really considered the possibility of that happening. And this is probably the closest that I've ever gotten to settling into that reality.
Do you know your neighbors?
I do know my neighbors. That's possibly my favorite thing about having lived here for these 5 years, particularly these 5 years. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I moved into a place with someone who was already ingrained in a community, so it was easy to just follow suit. But also COVID, the peak pandemic days were actually really strengthening for the bonds here in my building. We had a little bit of an herb garden growing in the middle, everybody working from home. There was some collaborative childcare situations that got developed when people needed to hop onto a meeting at the last second. It really showed me pretty early on in my time here how special my neighbors are, my little neighbor situation here, my neighborhood, but also how important that sense of immediate community can be in general, but also when there's like nothing else available.
What's your favorite area in your apartment?
I love my apartment, so don't let this confuse you. But my favorite area of my apartment is actually the space outside of my apartment, like the little walkway in front of the door. There's a section of it that's just like not really used. There's no foot traffic there, and it gets exceptional morning light, and I like to sit out there with my cat.
How has living here shaped your day-to-day routine?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is that, like I said, I'm from New York, and when I moved, I was working full-time in person in a different borough, and I had a lot of walking in my commute, and I liked it. I liked it a lot. It was a very long commute, but I enjoyed it. And then when I moved here, I pretty much immediately started working almost entirely remotely, and walking to the beach / along the beach path is the reason walking has stayed such an important part of my life, even in these 5 years where I feel, I mean, LA gets the reputation it gets, which is maybe why I'm talking about walking so much, but I mean, it's one of my favorite parts of my day. It also made running a more accessible hobby, feels like a strong word, exercise routine. I can also just like pop up the street to a grocery store, to a coffee shop to do some work.
So walking went from being functional to more of a pleasure and a joy, and then morphed back into function in a different way.
Totally. As a writer, I feel often like most inspired when I'm going for long walks. I have to like be sure that I'm not bumping into anything as I'm like typing into the notes app. I also have a dog, so walking is deeply functional there, but it's also like a bit of a mindfulness practice. When I moved here and I didn't have a job and I didn't know where to live and there was an oncoming pandemic, it was really important for my mental health. And then during the pandemic, walking felt like one of the only things I could do. Now it feels almost like regulatory to me, whereas 5 years ago it was so functional, so commuting.
Do you have a favorite memory tied to living here?
It's hard to pull out a specific memory, but like I said, when I first moved here, the pandemic hit not too long after, and one of my neighbors has these 2 kids who were doing remote learning for the first time, and they both had jobs, and I worked remotely and also was underemployed at the time, and I got my first foray into babysitting, which was really fun. She was 4 when the pandemic started, so like 4, 5, 6 range. A little bit of practicing letters, a little bit of drawing YouTube tutorials, a little bit of playing dress up, a little bit of her destroying every bottle of nail polish that I own. It was really fun. I'm the youngest in my family and I never babysat. I had like no experience spending time with children. And I actually credit her with the fact that I now paint regularly. When I moved here, I had like no regular art practice. All of my creativity went toward writing. And now I paint all the time. It was those YouTube tutorials.
If you had to leave this neighborhood, what would you miss the most?
I feel like there's an obvious answer, and it is the proximity to the beach. Anywhere else that I would choose to live would be like 50 minutes in traffic to get to the beach, whereas I have a 20-minute walk. But I think if I'm being really honest, I moved in with my cousin who's lived here for most of my life. And even living here now while she lives somewhere else, it still feels like this deep connection to her. And I'm a Cancer, so there was something about moving into this place and it already feeling like home. I'm not sure I could ever move to another place and feel that. So I really value it, and I am soaking it up.